Okay, good evening, everybody. I hope everyone can hear me well. We are in a different location today, so apologize for the background and hopefully the noise as well won't interfere. If you could hear me, make sure to put a thumbs up so I know you can hear me. And this week, of course, is dedicated in merit of all the Jewish people, wherever they may be, especially in the land of Israel, and those who need to be rescued, those that are front lines, those that need healing, those who need whatever they need. So if you'd like to sponsor a class, please let us know. We appreciate it. It really helps us continue doing these classes. And now let's get into it. So we are now in the period called the 3 weeks. The 3 weeks are the period between the fasts of 17th of Tammuz and the 9th of Av. At this time, it is a time when the Jewish people are in mourning, especially coming up on the Sunday evening, and Monday is the beginning of the month of Av. The Talmud says when Av comes, we reduce in joy. And so what are we mourning? We're mourning the destruction of the temple. So how do we fix that? Number one, we have to figure out why the temple was destroyed. The temple was destroyed because of baseless hatred. So baseless love. That's the remedy. As well, another thing that we can do is we can learn about the temple. We don't have the temple, but we can learn about it because we know that Mashiach is going to come and it's going to come back. We're going to have a temple again, so we got to know all about it. So it's an opportune time to study the laws of the temple, and that's what we're going to do this evening. We're going to study a little bit about the temple and the Temple Mount specifically, and we're going to learn, maybe learn a lesson if we can. All right, let's get into it. So the first thing is there's a mitzvah in the Torah to build a temple. Okay, Maimonides quotes this in the laws of the temple, that he says, right, also the Mikdash you shall make for me a sanctuary, and this was done in the times of the Jewish people were in the desert. This was done by building a tabernacle. It was a temporary structure that could be taken down and taken with them as Jewish people were traveling in the temple. Now, once the temple was, the tabernacle eventually was put aside for the temple. Now, the tabernacle stood in the desert for 40 years in different areas, wherever God told them to travel. So it traveled, in this week's Torah portion, actually, we talk about all the travels, and every single time the Jewish people would set up the tabernacle and put it away. And then eventually once the Jewish people came to the land of Israel, it was set up in Gilgal for 14 years. This is when the Jewish people were busy with conquering the land of Israel, and then they were settling the land of Israel, and dividing the land of Israel. Following that, they put the Mishkan in Shiloh. The Mishkan in Shiloh was there for 369 years. It had, it was similar to the way it was in the desert. However, they had, instead of wooden walls, they had stone walls. So it was a little more permanent. However, that was eventually destroyed by the Philistines, and then it moved to Nob, and then it moved to Givon, and for 57 years in these two areas, eventually they built a temple in Jerusalem. Now, once the temple was built in Jerusalem, however, there is a biblical prohibition of making sacrifices in any place besides the temple, and for any future generations. And previously, there were still allowed to be sacrifices brought outside the temple, depending on which period we're talking about. I believe during the Shiloh period, they were not bringing sacrifices outside the temple, the tabernacle. But besides that, they were. And definitely, once the tabernacle was switched up for the temple, they were no longer able to. No other place would be suitable for the temple. As it says, Zois menuchasi ad e'ad, right? God says, this is my resting place forever. Okay, now let's get into the details of how the temple actually looked. I'm not going to show diagrams. This medium is not very conducive for that, but I will try my best to describe it based on the diagrams I have in front of me, and especially for the point of our lesson today. The Temple Mount had 500 amos, 500 it was 500 amos, which is 500 cubits, and then there was the leveled area. Was 200 was what the leveled area was 500 amos, okay, but it was still a mountain. Therefore, we'll see in a second how that worked. Okay, so they had a partially leveled area. Some of it was leveled, some of it was not. So there was on the Temple Mount. So there's 500 of the 500 cubits by 500 cubits, which is 240 meters by 240 meters. That part is walled off, and there are different gates to come in. There are 5 gates, one on each direction. And on the south, there are 2 gates. Once you come in, then there is a big empty space. The temple only takes up, let's say, about a third of that space. Okay, so it's a pretty big area. Once you get close to the temple, there's another small fence that's only 42 inches high, 10 tefachim. 80 centimeters for those keeping score at home, and then right there's steps. Okay, I believe it's 10 steps. That because once you enter that area on the Temple Mount, you have to be ritually pure. It means not have touched a dead person, etc., or have been purified from the impurities. And then once you hit that, you go, so there's that fence to kind of block the actual temple area. Then you have to go up 10 steps to get to the actual temple area. Okay? So now, once we get to that, we have, when you walk into the temple, there's the first section is called the women's courtyard, the Ezras Nashim. Now, the only thing is, it was not only for women, okay, because that's how you get into the temple. It's for men and for women. However, during the celebrations or during the services, only women generally they had only women can only go to that area, and they had special there were certain exceptions, obviously. There were balconies that they built so that when men and women would be in that area together, there would be a separation as required by Jewish law. And so in that area, that's where they had the Simchas Beis HaShoeva, for example, the celebration of the drawing of the water during Sukkot. And also in that area, on each corner, there are 4, we'll call them storage areas for different things. And then inside, once you get inside, you have the inner courtyard, okay? It's called the Chatzar, and in this area is where you have the altar and the kior, the wash basin for the Kohanim. That is where all the sacrifice happened, the daily sacrifices, the Passover sacrifice, any sin offering. It's all happening. Any animal sacrifices happening in there, and all the Jewish people could come. Regular Jewish people could come into a certain area. Past that area, there was like a little buffer zone, and then there's a couple steps. There's 3 steps to go in. So there's 15 steps to get into the Chatzar, into the courtyard. Then there's 3 steps to get into the area where only Kohanim could go. Okay, and then there is this area where the altar is, etc. Then past there, you have the Heichal. Okay, the sanctuary. In the sanctuary, that's where you have, there's 2 sections. There's the Kodesh, the Holy, and then there's the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies. Inside the Holy of Holies, so there's 12 steps to get into so you have 15 steps to get into the courtyard, 3 steps to get into the place of the Israelites, then 12 steps to get into I hope I'm getting that right. And then 12 steps to get to the sanctuary, and in the sanctuary you have the menorah, you have the golden altar, and you have the table with the showbread, and inside there's a curtain, and then inside there is the ark and the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Okay, so this area of that there's no elevation. So we see that the courtyard, there's different elevations, okay, on the Temple Mount. All right, so you have the elevation to get into the actual let's call it the temple area. Then there's the elevation to get from the women's area, the women's area, we'll call it, to the main area where everybody could go. Then there's the area where only priests could go, and then there's another elevation to get to the area where only the priests are, nobody could see in there, right? So I don't think you could see in there. It's a building. There's no roof, but you can't see into the inside the area where the menorah, the showbread, and the golden altar where they offer incense. That is all, and then obviously within that is the Kodesh HaKodashim, the Holy of Holies. That also is all restricted, and that area is also that. So there's an elevation to go to that area as well. This we'll call the sanctuary. Okay, so the question. Let's get into it. Let's start with Maimonides. In the Laws of the Temple, chapter 6, he starts off that the Mikdash, the temple, it was not built on a flat surface. It was built in an elevation or an incline, the incline of the mountain. So the $1 million question is, why does Maimonides, first of all, why does it matter? Why does it matter if it's built on an incline? Number one. Number two is, why does Maimonides say it was not built on a flat surface? It's a very strange way of talk. I want to tell you, listen, I'm not wearing a black shirt today. I am wearing a blue shirt. Just tell me you're wearing a blue shirt. I'll figure out you're not wearing a black shirt, right? So why does he say it like that? So the reason is that actually the tabernacle, the Mishkan, that was built by Moses and was used by the Jewish people for many, many years, was actually built on a flat surface. There was not supposed to be any distinction of the areas, okay, of the tabernacle. So Maimonides is pointing out that the temple was built specifically on an incline. So why does it matter? It matters is because the house of the Mikdash is the house of God, represents the spiritual service, right? It's not just the physical house; it's a spiritual thing, and it affects our daily lives. So what is the lesson for us? Why is it important? Because we always have to, whenever we get to a higher level, there has to be steps for us to get there, right? There has to be, if we're going to improve on ourselves, we have to elevate ourselves in some way to get to that higher level, correct? It's not enough that we just, well, now I'm doing this, now I'm doing that. No, we have to improve ourselves. We have to make ourselves better, better ourselves, whether that's in the way that we behave with other people, whether that's the way we behave with God, before we elevate our divine service. So that is why the temple was always built on a higher level, and therefore we see the need to always progress. We always need to progress, and when we progress, we have to elevate ourselves in some way. So the $1 million question is, why is it important for the temple to be on an incline? However, the tabernacle is like we said, is totally level. So let's take a step back on the difference, the historical difference between the tabernacle and the temple. In the coming to the tabernacle, whenever the Jewish people would come, we learned in this week's Torah portion of the 47, I believe. I could be off on the number. Maybe it's 41. My brain isn't working. How many travels Jewish people had in the desert? I'm sorry, 42. There we go. I figured it out. The 42 travels Jewish people had in the desert, every single time they traveled, they came to a place, God told them they would set up the tabernacle. They would take it apart. Now, what if I go today in the desert and I go to a place that the tabernacle once stood here for a week, it might have stood there for a year, it might have stood there for a day, could have stood there, a place where they stayed for years. That place has no holiness at all. Because that area, the Mishkan, is called a temporary dwelling for God. And therefore, there is no holiness once the tabernacle left. However, when it comes to the Holy Temple, even today, that area of the Temple Mount where the temple stood has the same holiness as it did back when the temple stood. In other words, the temple changed the physical space that the Jewish people where it was. It changed the space to the point that so we said earlier that you had to be ritually pure, not to touch a dead person, for example, in order to stand there. That is why today, if you go to the Temple Mount, there's a sign that the chief rabbinate forbids going there, and most, I would say 99% of rabbis, I would even venture to say 100% of mainstream Orthodox Judaism says you cannot go to that area. Therefore, it is forbidden, a biblical prohibition of going to this area where everybody today is considered ritually impure because we don't have the ability to become pure from having been in the same room or touched someone who touched someone, whatever, etc., of a dead person. If anyone has been to a cemetery, or even if they know someone has been to a cemetery, they're ritually impure. And therefore, it is impossible for us to become pure because we don't have the red heifer. So we can't go there. So that applies even today, 1900 plus years after the destruction of the temple. So we see that the holiness of the temple, because that's why it changed. That's why it's kind of like it has this idea of the flat of the. There's no elevation, right? There's no incline. There's no progression in the tabernacle because it's just totally. It's like flat, like nothing changed. And versus the temple, every single thing that had to be an elevation and an elevation, and that actually elevated the physical space as well. However, there's one exception. What's the exception? In the temple, there's the space between the holy area and the Holy of Holies. It's just separated by a curtain. There's no steps. So the question is, we're saying that in order, and that's the holiest place, only the Kohen Gadol can go in there. The high priest could go into the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur. Once a year, well, one day a year, he goes in multiple times. So one day a year, he goes in and he does a special service. Besides that, nobody goes in there. So that must be the holiest place. It is the holiest place, to the point that there are tremendous miracles that go on there, etc. And how is it possible? We have the Holy Ark. So how come there's no elevation? There should be maybe, there's 15 steps to get into the temple. Maybe there should be 100 steps, right? There should be something, maybe at least a couple steps. You're going from the holy to the Holy of Holies. However, let's take a step back. When it comes to the way that we relate to something, the idea of steps, they don't necessarily connotate separation. They actually, in a way, connotate a connection, right? That I need, obviously, this part is elevated. I understand that, and I'm down here. So in order to get there, I use the steps. It's a bridge it connects me to where I am, to where I need to go. So it shows that there is some sort of relativism between the two areas, or where I am now to where I want to go, right? So meaning I'm able to go to the place where I am, and I'm able to I'm here where I am, and I'm able to get to the place where I'm going. It's available to me. There's a connectivity there. However, when it comes to something that certain things are so beyond our comprehension, are so beyond our abilities, that even if I had 1,000 steps, it's not, there is no connection. There is no bridge, right? So therefore, that area is flat, to connotate this idea that it's not like I could all of a sudden become a Kohen Gadol. I could become the high priest. That is a gift from God. And God says, okay, today, yes, correct. There is no connection between where you are and where you're going. But on Yom Kippur, God says he picks the holiest person of the Jewish people, essentially, and he brings him into this holy, holy place. But it's not because you've done something to connect you to that place. In other words, all the other areas of the temple, there's a process, right? There's a process where I can become holy enough to enter the Temple Mount. There's a process where I could become worthy of going into the temple. There's a process where I could become worthy of being in the Holy of Holies, into the holiest part of the temple by being a priest or whatever it is, and by elevating oneself. But when it comes to the Holy of Holies, there's really no connection. And the only reason you're there is because God invited you in. It's not because you've done something that you've elevated yourself. There's a point where in divine service that God kind of gifts us the next level, because we can never reach certain things that they are divine. We are limited beings, and there are things that are divine, and we really have no connection to them. But on Yom Kippur, God says, okay, I'm going to bring you into my home and take you in. So we see here really the lesson we can learn from this entire idea is that when we always have to elevate ourselves, we always have to be reaching higher, we always have to be progressing in our service of God if we want it to change us. If we're going to be like the tabernacle and we're going to be flat, right, and we're not going to elevate ourselves, then once the inspiration goes away, then we're left with nothing. Just like the tabernacle, once it moved to the next spot, that was it. It was transient. If we want to have a true impact on ourselves, our surroundings, our family, our community, we always have to be growing, we always have to be progressing, and then there is a everlasting connection between us and God that can never be broken. So wishing everybody a good Shabbos, and God willing, we will see you next week.